So, good morning again, Eilam, my name. I'm coming from a background of bodywork as well as academic research in history and philosophy of science. For the body people, usually I was too much of an academic, and for the academics, usually I was too much of this body person. So I got used to being sort of an amphibic creature that can live in the water and on land and try to be on the in-betweens, which is a very interesting fringe experience. And some of those insights of this fringe experience I would love to share with you today. It's the first time that I talk about this, but it has been in the making for some 30 years in my training and in my interest, and I'm very passionate about this. Sometimes when I talk about those things, people start to have their eyes a bit like a casino machine in Vegas, because it's like, whoa. So it might be a little bit dense in the beginning. I'm trying to make it as simple as I can. And to make it real and kind of a happy thing within the context, I think it's a perfect combination and also a very well prepared kind of atmosphere for this kind of talk. I called it Embodiment Lost. Stealing this phrase, embodiment lost. Stealing a phrase from John Middleton's Paradise Lost. So, how we actually lost the most natural place for us to be. Might sound negative, but in the end I would also like to show some positive possibilities that are inherent in this. The three bulks of the talk will be about antiquity, embodiment in antiquity. That's where I was mentioning the spirit versus the flesh in ancient religions. The second bulk is about modernity. Once we move into the modern age, we have the body-mind dualism, and we have the subjective-objective split. And everything that we do today, I think, is very much a sign of the times, of having people searching somehow to bring these together again. Okay, so in order for us not to lose track, it would be as if there was once a place where humans were more embodied. It went into a kind of major split that they didn't even know how to bring it back again. And then gradually in our times, I would say, we are searching how to mix, how to blend these two very powerful parts of who we are. So that's the travel. Okay, now, I do think that if we have the clarity, including the historical clarity, and I will try to condense 2,500 years in few minutes, so it will be a bit of a kvetch experience. To make it very simple, could be a little oversimplified, but very useful for us to come to the discussion of what is actually happening today. And what is it that we are lacking today in order to make embodiment enter and rehabilitate into our culture and make its full impact. I've been doing embodiment in my working room with individuals for 25 years. I don't feel it's enough. People get the idea. They go home, they have the feeling of it, but they hardly have a language for it. They hardly have the concept for it. It's very difficult to reach a paradigm shift when we are coming from the embodiment aspect, because we don't yet have the languages for this. And I will try to tap into some of those possibilities concerning history, but actually my interest is in the future. I have a little baby boy who didn't sleep last night, 2.5 years, and I wonder which kind of world will he inherit when they grow up, how much of the embodiment feeling of their organism they will have with them. And I'm daring to share with you my concern about what happens in our culture nowadays, that with the potential of bringing embodiment together, there are so many powers that can rip it back apart, technological and others. So there is something here that for me is a big drama. I'm a little bit overexcited about it. I will try to calm down. The fact that we didn't sleep last night, I will be too tired to get a heart attack. So we can start. In the natural world, when we see living creatures, living beings, life forms, they do it in two very distinct, combined ways. Every life form happens in a body, in the natural world. And every living being that has a body has some level of consciousness, call it what you may, awareness. Even on a cellular level, people start to notice those processes. So if I look very, very simple, life would appear to be a sort of embodied awareness. Very simple. If I look at what embodiment is simply the experience of having happy, living, embodied awareness. Basically everything that we are now here. Somehow those things don't seem to be so simple in the end. I would like to give a quotation from Hermann Hesse. I loved his books when I was a teenager, and one of those quotations never left me since. In a book called Damien, the protagonist, the hero of the story, tells something like this. All I wanted was to live the life that was in me, struggling to come out. Why was it so hard? I could identify very well with this statement, and I still then had the question, why is it really so hard? Why do we need to go to training, have touch, massage, all kinds of very special things, sometimes spooky things, in order to have our embodiment? Being alive, having embodied awareness, it's supposed to be built in. It's supposed to be self-evident, straightforward. And somehow people struggle with it. If I look at what happens with embodiment, for many people it's a huge struggle. Each one has a very different body, which is, by the way, very interesting. Every living creature is different. And each one faces his own or her own challenges, or its own challenges. But somehow it's really not simple. And this is the question that led me to start to investigate why. Okay? Until now we are okay? Cool. I think the more we are clear about the reasons of why this is like that, the more it will be easier for us to start to look for a way out. Cool. So our story starts with antiquity. I will give you some quotations that I'm sure you are familiar with, but it will now start to make sense. What happens in antiquity, if you think of embodied awareness as a name for now, just to work with this kind of term, we are experiencing a shift, dramatic shift, that takes from China, India, Persia, Judea, and Greece. All the major civilizations of the culture, the ancient cultures, go through a process about 2,500 years ago that tears their world into a transcendent world above this world and an immanent world that is down here. Everything that was good, that was divine, that was pure, that was true, that was permanent, that was perfect, was up there in the transcendent world. Everything that was sinful, a little bit dirty, imperfect, problematic, full of desires and lusts and out of control and was down here. This thing created for our embodied awareness a split that is extremely dominant in our culture, and it was there for 2,000 years. Our society, our cultures come out of the struggle with that split, and there is a very strong agenda behind it. It was going through all the ancient religions into Christianity. It was very strong in Platonism and in some of the philosophical schools that were also incorporated into this Western cultured world. And just to give you some examples, when Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world," he and the Father come from there. When Jesus says, "Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's and give unto God what belongs to God," he speaks about two powers, two authorities, one of them up there, one of them up here, and separating between them. But the macrocosmic, the worldview that brought this amazing shift in people's consciousness didn't just stay as a worldview, as a macrocosmic. It started to influence how people were seeing themselves. We are inhabitants of this world. So when Jesus, for instance, says to his disciple, "The spirit yearns," but your body is weak. You can start to sense how strong this split starts to knock on our door coming back home. Plato had it in a different way. He said that we live in a cave, in this parable cave of the cave, and he told us that the real world is outside. It's outside of our physical experience. There is a world out there, it's called the world of ideas, where everything is true and known and clear. We just don't have access to it. The funny thing is that we used to have access to it. Ask yourself, when? Before we materialized into a body. So our knowledge became a remembrance of something we knew as spirits, and we lost by entering our embodiment. Now, those things are dramatic. They influence us and our civilization in very, very powerful ways until today. In the Middle Ages, for instance, you have Augustine in the early Middle Ages already speaking about the celestial city, the heavenly city, and the earthly city. There was a model in heaven for everything it's supposed to happen on earth. It's like a stempel, it's like a stamp. And the model was there, the reality that was never good enough was down here. And our bodies were split between these two in a very, very strong impulse. Dante has this inferno, purgatory, and heaven, again, this axis between the lower world and the upper world, that had the whole concept of this culture and civilizations within it. This was carrying this split very, very strongly within it, and it followed us all the way to the new and to the new era or to the modern period. What does it mean for us? Human vocation became disembodiment. It became something that told us this world is something you have to transcend. Your animal nature you have to overcome. The image of the spiritual people were the hermits, the monks, the saints, people that renounced the world, renounced often their bodies, and were ascending to a higher sphere. And it also mentioned quite simply in the texts themselves, the body was a tomb of the soul. The body was the prison of the spirit. The body lies to us. It's a deceitful organism that actually the sensations that we have are not real. In order to have something real, we have to go through beyond the body into this world of knowledge that is somewhere else. And of course, in religion, that the body was a sinful place. It was a bad place. So imagine embodied awareness as a way of life, as a life form, split between an upper world and a lower world. This was going through all the aspects of our culture until the late Middle Ages, and still residues and remains are with us today. What happens with the new era was that something was born that we can call science, modern science. There was one crazy guy called Galileo. Galileo brought this definition of an upper world and a lower world coming crashing down. He discovered that the celestial spheres are imperfect. The sun has spots. There are mountains on the moon, just like the mountains in Italy. Something is wrong, or maybe something is good. Nature became one unified sphere. Everything is natural, including the astronomic phenomena, including the terrestrial, the earthly phenomena. And when he brought this coming crashing down, everything became physical. Everything became natural. We started to speak about everything is made of atoms, everything is a chemical code, everything can be explained by mechanics, and everything is material or material. So we have a material universe that suddenly came crushing down all these interesting structures of transcendence and immanence. What this brought about later on was the split between the body that was part of this material universe and the mind that was starting to recede into an intellectual sphere. So the mind became a very, very strong kind of a hero, even though it became less and less embodied. It became more disembodied, more mental. And we were drawing somewhere in the back of our little brains the transcendence that once was in the heavens became something that we have here. With a lot of power. The mind could study everything and could analyze anything. The only thing it could not fully analyze until our times was the mind itself. It became a kind of a ghost in the machine. So when Sting sings that we are spirits in a material world, this is the modern experience. We are spirits in a material world. The behavior of modern times towards nature and the body was very similar. So the vocation of people was to exploit nature, to use nature, to work with nature, in the same way also to approach the body. We can study and we can work with it. We can use different tools to approach nature and to approach the body. So the body becomes an object of study, and the body becomes also material that we can work with. If you mention Foucault much later on, how can we discipline the body? How can we program the body? The ability to program the body through the mind comes from this split between them. And with the Cartesian split, the body and the mind were, as if, at least culturally accepted, completely separate. You have the body that lives in the real world, physical world, and you have the mind that lives in a thinking world, but actually very individualized. We have a subject inside and the whole objective world outside. This created another split in our embodied awareness, something as if that is around me, that is the world, and there is a me inside of me that is going inside. So where the old split was up and down, this split was in and out. But one way or another, the body was already something that was alienated. It was not anymore my own. I could say that this is my body, but for many people it was not felt as if it's really their own and they fully inhabit it. What happens in the last decades, and I'm talking from basic familiarity with some of those researchers, and I'm sure that there are a lot of more information that can come later on, we start to discover how important the body is, how important emotions are, and how important our somatic experience is in our cognition, in our decision making. We start to see how emotions are relevant to our memory, how we have to be emotionally involved in order to remember what we learn, even in school. Children have to be engaged in order to remember the material. The body became very important also in biochemistry and in physiology, starting to talk about molecules that are resonating with our emotions and how the body cannot be separate anymore. The belief that we had, that the body can be separated from the mind, if we know enough physiology, proved entirely the opposite. Our guts produces peptides for our brains and vice versa, and our immune system is appearing in all kinds of places we would never expect. Those distinctions are falling apart in our days' research, including in physics, when people start to show how our consciousness, how our perception is involved with our world, with our experience. There is no reality without perception of reality. And this goes on and on. That also shows us that people are searching, also in scientific domains and fields, there is this search of how to bring embodiment into an experience, an overall experience, like you were mentioning before, that there is something that includes an inclusive of everything that I am that is happening here. This is the very unique role of the body. I would like maybe to move to the next phase of this. Working with individuals, I could see the level of wisdom in the body, of individuals that have intelligence that is very unique to them, and how they solve problems, how their talents are manifesting. So Once we entered the body, a whole world suddenly opens. And I was very curious about this. What actually happens in the body? I will try just to show you some guidelines of discussion that maybe we can later on take into more details. One thing is this: in the body itself, we have a very unique situation. Being embodied brings us to a very, very specific situation that doesn't exist for us anywhere else. If I look at myself as a subject, and if I look at this as an object, this definition that seems to be so familiar from the modern times collapses when I enter my body. Because when I enter my body, in my experience, I can talk about it as a subject, as an object, but basically those distinctions become obsolete. They fall apart. I have an experience in my body that is a singular experience, like a black hole. You fall in, forget space, forget time, and this is what happens to clients. Many times when they start to go into the body to feel, to breathe, to ache, to sense what is happening to them, they say, wow, this is like taking drugs or something. My perception is altered. Something is different because I am entering this singularity point. This is huge, because if we speak about subject and object and we forget the body, we forget the bridge to connect the two together. If we speak about the body and the mind and we forget the world, we have a body as if the world, there is no difference between them. There is a huge difference between them. The place where the world comes to meet me and where I meet the world is here. We have bacteria in our guts that are found in the deepest oceans of the earth. We have hemoglobin or iron molecules in our blood that comes from supernovas in the universe. We are a meeting point. We are exactly what we were searching all the time. A meeting point where the world and me meet together, and actually everything else falls into place. The only thing we are missing, we don't have a language for this. We don't have a paradigm for this. We have something amazing, like a pure experience, like, wow. I have this kind of faces sometimes, people coming out of the working room. Wow. Okay, now please say this wow to your million friends, and let's wake the whole world up. Like, this is the place where our perception starts. And this is so beautiful. And it feels so natural. And it happens in a way that is directly, so direct, so immediate, that we don't have the images to describe it. Many times when people try to describe it, it starts to sound like poetry. I feel the air starts to be a little bit milky, and my breathing does like something red here. It's amazing. But we are really lacking even the language. Our language is completely disembodied. When I say there is a me and there is my body, hello. I don't even have a way to say me without saying my body as if something I possess. It's something I'm morally responsible for. It's something that I have a mind over matter to control. But I don't really have, even not a friend on board. I can give you a little bit of examples. I had very, very funny conversations, especially with German clients. I think humor is really necessary to make them more loose. And I'm saying it with a lot of love and respect. I had people coming from ecological organizations, Friends of the Earth and the like. And I was trying to tell them, hey, your body is part of the earth. You want to be a friend of the earth, you do amazing projects with rivers and all kinds of ecological systems. How about starting with the belly? How about breathing here? This is the most amazing pet you are ever going to be, not just to own. And every time we invest in the body, the breathing, attention, movement, something with intention, the body brings it back 1,000-fold. It's like a very fertile ground that hasn't yet given up on us. And it's a very good friend. Now this is difficult, especially when you work with people with difficult backgrounds, like trauma or war, different accidents, operations. Our bodies are a bit like a Stadtplan. They're a bit like a map with different places that tell different stories. Apropos the Museum of Jan, You can have these different places in the body that tell different stories. If you learn to listen to them, there is an immense level of intelligence there. So, back to the guidelines. We have subjective experience, objective experience, and the body in between. Everything happens here. Okay, you can still follow me, it's okay? Everything happens here. This is the place that is a missing landscape in our culture. When we had in Renaissance culture those painters that began to discover the realism of perspective. The body is the missing point in this whole thing. It's a landscape of sensations. There is a back to it, there is a side to it, there is a front to it, above and below, that goes in all directions, but as if I'm not there to feel it. So I can see an amazing world and miss the observer as a whole. When I go into the body and I start also teaching people to describe sensations, now we even have a science for it, it's called interoception. A big name now in science. Still very much scientific, but if people start to take it on board and feel, they suddenly discover layers in their body that they were not aware of before. Coming into the body and sensing those areas, they suddenly start to feel, wow, my mind is changing. No wonder we are embodied awarenesses. So some people come after working years with their minds, and they discover the body, and through the body they have a shortcut to the mind. Because if you do something here, it influences here. Instead of running there, I can go into the body here. Amazing thing, for instance, with meditation. I have Zen meditative experts that come to learn to do something with their bodies, and they say, whoop, this works very, very nice. It gives me a shortcut into a meditative state, just by feeling somehow this area. Okay, now bringing this landscape on board allows us also to move our attention. We can start to shift our awareness in our body, not only in the world. So I can, for instance, take my resources and start to bring them to a place. If there is a place that needs attention, power, healing, I can shift, like moving resources around. We are used to wiring money to where we need to. We can do the same thing with our attention. And our attention, we are now knowing already, is embodied. So when we shift our attention, it goes into a physical experience. And I don't know if this can be still measured, but it's a very interesting field to check. What happened when I shift attention? When I work within this landscape of my body and bring my awareness by choice into a specific area. Maybe I can make here kind of a pause just to see a little bit how it goes and if there is something to look into before we go into more specific things that don't get ahead of myself here. I can say, for instance, that the next levels would be also to go into learning, into schools, into teaching people to think, because we still think old school. We still think Greek. We still think theoria and techne, or theory and practice. We are still 2,000 years back in the level that we think. To think in the body would look very different.
Maybe to feel.
To feel, for sure.
Teach people to feel, or just to think. They think 2,000 backwards, but they also feel, so maybe they start by feeling, which will change their thinking.
Very interesting to see, for instance, when people start to get connected to the feeling as an embodied experience, many times it starts to transform. It's a very interesting space. When you are trying not to feel it, it gets stuck. Here, it's, for instance, is a good place where the mechanics are completely reversed. If you try to push a feeling, it gets into you. If you allow it to be, it moves. So it's exactly the opposite of everything we do with mechanics that we are so used to. So for sure. And when you start to attend to this feeling, it starts to transform. I had little children coming to learn with me because they had belly aches and a lot of aggression, and they used to breathe to the belly and train with it, and it started to get hot and a bit strange, and slowly things start to move. It's very interesting. Sometimes we cannot fully explain, but you don't need to. You can feel it. And all these different experiences can take place in embodiment when it's becoming a realm that is allowed to feel. I can think, I can resist, I can be angry, I can whatever. I can feel that I own something. I have my little boy that learns now how to share his little toys when he goes to the sandpit. Very difficult issue. So what belongs to me, what belongs to somebody else, when I want to give it, when I don't, will I get it back? Big thing. So all this takes place in the body. And when we go there, and we do this with this kind of a friendliness attitude or with love, the body starts to grow. It's not for nothing that people heal sometimes so fast when they are engaged in their own healing and when they have this attitude. Think of it as an animal. If we have to befriend a horse or a dog or a monkey, and we try to do it with respect, we are getting something back. The only thing with our bodies is that we do it within our own living experience. And maybe one last thing. As physics now starts to let go of the concept of material universe as the foundation of things, we still tend to talk about the body as a material being. We are out of sync with actually what is happening. So looking at the body not just as a material thing, but as a perceptual thing. It's a perceptual embodied organism. We can of course analyze aspects of its material appearance. One physicist I came across in one of the quotations that I was reading was that he says, the universe is immaterial. Have fun, enjoy it. It's kind of a crazy thing, but it is in a way true. We are still talking about materialistic aspects of the body which are very important. But at the same time, the more we go into life phenomena with our very materialistic kind of concepts in science, the more it starts to show us that there is something that allows us to go a step ahead. We just don't yet know where it goes. But we can see that there is something there with the materialistic thinking that starts to call for something deeper and larger, and it's there that our perception can have a kind of a wake-up call to bring it to the next level. And the same thing with spirituality. Spirituality was considered something that was immaterial. How do we bring our spirituality as an impulse, as human beings, perhaps with different terms and different words, to reside respectfully within a physical experience of the body? It's not against, but it's with. That the meaning of spirituality and materialism might be already obsolete as well. It's gone. So what are we left with? We're left with a feeling of involvement and crazy perception to do all kinds of things. Bringing this large travel from the flesh-spirit split into the body-mind and then into where we are now, as if this road is searching for a place to come back together. And this is the place that I think we are living in our era. We are struggling in a lot of different ways how to bring those two together. And I think it's a huge topic that has to be much more spoken of beyond the wellness branch that I also humbly say I come from. Beyond the New Age attitudes as such in those specific communities, how do we bring human beings back together? Because we still carry the old scars, including shame, traumas, whatever, that belong to how we are as a body and how we are allowed to live as a body. So I would see this as the big thing. What I'm a little bit concerned about is that we have now a few decades of a chance to do something with embodiment before we start to become entirely cyborgians, bionics, and planted chips, and we become again gods because their abilities will be infinite. But our bodies will, I I suspect, become again an animal or a material that we can intervene as much as we want. So I think we do have a kind of a window.
Can you comment on the problematic of it? What do you see is the problematic of this version?
Of this cyborg
The
thing.
cyber thing, yes.
Again, I'm not an expert. I learned now how to use Facebook. So. But when we look at the body as a true partner in our culture, the body has to find its own place, to be rehabilitated. It's almost like a natural reserve. Like you have a natural reservation for birds and for trees. We hardly find a place like this for our bodies. And within a few decades, if I have a chip that connects me, my iPhone or whatever phone will soon become, in Sweden there are already chips for credit cards and identity cards.
Advances into the bodies, yes.
They are very advanced in this, so if we take this as we imagine how technology will grow, the body will become again a cyborg, or not again, much more as it is now, and will go back into the machine. In the modern times, we were already ghosts in the machine, modern machine. There is a meaning that I never really know. I think in brain science, Michael, they don't really find that meaning as well. They find a little talking part, but not really the meaning part. But the meaning part is the one we identify. So that's going to be the walls. And our bodies become these machines that become now upgraded, but again, not necessarily having a chance for the body to manifest itself as an equal partner.
And what is the, I don't know if tell me if you have other plans to talk, if you want to talk about other things, but this, because I think for many people they want that. They want that scenario. Many people look at being half cyber dogs as a nice option because you never die or you live for 300 years. Like, that's why I'm asking what
it's extremely powerful tool in our civilization. It will become it become much stronger all the time. We had it already in the 19th century. Once anesthesia became popular and cheap and available, people started to do plastic surgery. So the body becomes an object of intervention, of art. I can make it nicer, I can make it better. And of course, it's part of the market, it's part of what is happening. And that's why I'm saying that we have a very special, maybe a unique period of time before this takes on or off very, very strong. And will change our bodies in unimaginable ways again. And that's what I'm saying. I think we have something very special that we should wake up. Because when I talk to people in university or scientists or people that are interested in this, I hear them saying, yeah, we have all these wonderful theories, but we are missing something with the body. And when I talk to practitioners that work with me, they said, we have these amazing sessions, but we don't know what to say about it. Bringing those two together will already make a huge impact now. And I think time is of the essence before it starts to go into the next phase.